Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me all right. So if you want to just put in the chat box, if you can see the chat box that you can hear me, that would be super. So my name's Louise and I'm the tutor for management case here at Viva. And oh, that's great. Thank you, folks. That's super. So this evening, we're just going to have a session that's free to everyone. So if you're already on our courses, then that's great. If you're not, then this is just a free session. And the aim of it is to get you on the right track, to enable you to plan how to study for management case and know the right things to do, and be able to do that successfully over the coming weeks, so that you can sit the exam and be successful and pass it in August. So as I said, I'm Louise. So I'm the tutor at Viva for management case. I've taught CIMA case studies ever since they were introduced. So that makes me quite old, clearly. So I've taught strategic case in the past, I've taught operational, and now I'm teaching management case now. So it's a super exam. And if we understand what we need to do, it's absolutely possible. So I'm the tutor at Viva here to help you, if you're on one of our courses, to be able to do exactly that, to pass this exam. So what I want to do, just for 5 minutes, is just show you the courses that Viva offer, so that if any of you are booked on any courses and are interested in doing that, you can see what the options are. And then once we've done that, then we're going to go straight into my suggestions for what you need to be doing in order to crack on now and get that management case studied and passed. So first of all, I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully then, let me just stop my video first of all. There we go. Hopefully then we will be able to see that I've just got on screen the Viva Financial Tuition Management Case website page. And on here, it tells you the options that you've got if you'd like to join us on the course. So there's a couple of different options if you want to join us on the course. And the starting point for that is the course that is priced at £249. So if what we're going to do is we're just going to whiz over to the two options that we've got for courses. But as I say, this evening today is completely free, and this is being recorded. And at the end of this evening, probably by tomorrow morning, it will be uploaded onto Viva's YouTube page. So if you want to catch it in its recording and look at it again, you can do that. It'll be on the YouTube page. So that will be accessible to everybody whether you're on a course or not. After today, of course, then there's lots more sessions that I'll be doing. And there's also sessions that I've already pre-recorded. So if we just look for August at the options we have for the course. So the course runs for 6 weeks, starting from today. And we've got the standard course and the elite course. So if we just have a quick look here, we can see what the standard course includes. So that has on-demand video lectures. Now, what that means is we have got lectures that cover the analysis of the pre-scene, industry analysis, analysis of Flaxhall's financial information. And we've also got recordings of applied sessions where I go through E2, F2 and P2, but where I apply them to our pre-scene Flaxhall. So I apply them to our company and we talk about how these various different theory areas from E2, F2 and P2 could be tested in relation to Flaxhall. So we've got all those recordings and they're all available to you on the standard course. We've got the pre-scene that we've annotated really smartly and with lots of good annotations. So to make you think about the different areas of E2, P2 and F2 that relate to that pre-scene, and also make you think about how different scenarios could be tested in your exam. We've also got in the standard course 5 fantastic mock exams. Now, however you're studying for your management case exam, and whether you're with us or you're not, and you might be with someone else studying, or you might be studying yourself, what I absolutely recommend above absolutely everything else is the need for you to practice on mock exams, because you can look at the pre-seen, you can look at E2, F2 and P2 theory until you practice using all that in an exam. You won't be developing your exam skills. And that's what you need to be able to do. So we've got 5 mock exams with super duper solutions. And if you're on the elite course and you have access to those exams, you can then plan in the 6 weeks to basically do 1 mock exam every week. You've got the solutions and you can therefore go through those solutions. Now, we've also got downloadable course notes. So these are really useful for you. These are helping you with understanding what management case is all about, and also with covering some of the basic knowledge that you need from E2, F2 and P2. So can you see here, we've ticked that we've got O2 theory reviews. So we've got recaps of the key areas, not all of the detail from those 3 papers, but the key areas that regularly get tested in management case. So that's all on the elite course. Now I've seen there's a question, which is super. And what I'm going to do this evening, if it's okay with you, is I'll answer the questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, absolutely fine. Just pop them in that chat box. When we get to the end of the whole session, I'll come back and I'll go through all of those questions. Okay, so I've run through the standard course. And that standard course then, if you wanted to join us, that's £249. And you'll have access to all of that support throughout this period up until each time you sit your exam. If you wanted to enroll on our elite course, so as you can see, there's a few more things you get with that elite course. So predominantly, the main thing that you get with that is you get me live rather than pre-recorded. So we have a number of workshops. And those workshops are more interactive than tonight. So on the workshops, you can ask me questions as we go through rather than waiting until the end. And, you can say, well, I would have done this and I'll explain what I've done. So very interactive. And we have workshops that cover the exam process. So we really understand the exam technique needed. And then we have workshops that cover all of the 5 mocks. Now, these sessions are just really, really useful, because what I do is I go through how I would have tackled each mock and what I would have done. And what I would have done isn't necessarily the same as the expert who's written the solutions. So it's not me who writes the solutions. So basically you get 2 versions. You get the solutions that are written by an expert, and you get me saying how I'd have done it. So in the workshop, we go through the mock exam and I pinpoint how I'd think about that question, how I'd structure my answer, what the key points are that I bring in. So those interactive workshops where we go through the mocks and have those debriefs, those are really, really helpful. In addition, we have a couple of sessions where we just have a mid-course check, and I just sort of catch up with everyone to see how you're doing. So that's a live session. And also towards the end, again, we have another session where we just catch up and think about what the sort of key points are then that we need to really make sure we've understood before we take that exam. So a lot of sessions with me if you're on that elite course. And then you've got access as well to me through the community and the tutor discussion area. So you're able to join the elite discussion area, and then you can ask questions of each other, but you can also ask questions of me. And I will pop things into that discussion forum quite regularly, things I think you should read or questions that I think could come up in the exam. So that's another good discussion area that you'll have access to. Finally, the other really big benefit of the elite course is that when you do a mock exam, you can submit it and you will get it marked. Now, the marking is super because it's not just a mark, but you get feedback as to how you could improve your answers, where your exam technique might not be quite right, where you need to improve. So elite course option there as well. It is more expensive. Absolutely. So if you're thinking of joining us, then a price might be a factor, of course. Both of our courses are super. The standard one, you've got loads of good materials, lots of good pre-recordings, and you've got me pre-recorded, so that's good. Obviously, with the elite, you get those extra things which are really valuable. But of course, it is driven by, what you could be paying for that. If you want to enroll on either of those, then on our website, you can see you can just do that. You can click on enroll there. And there is an option, I think, for the elite course here, whereby if you wanted to pay in installments so that you can spread the cost, that is absolutely possible. So those are two course types. I just wanted to show you those if you are thinking of getting yourself on a course before to help you prepare for this exam. So what I'm going to do is I'll just pop the link that I've just been looking at into our chat box, and then anybody who does want to then follow that up and just see what the options are, you've got the link then to our website. Then, so that's the end of that, because now I think what we really want to do is we want to start thinking about what are you now going to do for the next 6 weeks? What are the important things for us to do if we're preparing for this exam? So I'm now going to flip over to my slides, which hopefully now you can see. So mastering the August 2024 management case study. So let's get on with that and set us all off in the right direction, knowing what we need to do. Okay then, so the agenda for this evening. First of all, we're going to just have a look at some of the key pre-scene information. Now, obviously, this pre-scene has been out since the previous sitting of this exam, so May. So I taught all of the May students for Viva. So the pre-scene information has been around for a little while, and we're just going to go through that and just pull out some of the key points. And also we're going to talk about why does it really matter that you really understand the pre-scene. And understanding the pre-scene is going to be a really important thing for you to do in the coming 6 weeks. Once we've looked at that, we'll then think about some of the key theories that were covered in E2, F2 and P2. Now, I know that some students will have studied through the FLP route. Other students might have studied through the traditional CIMA route, where you've sat objective testing exams. Whichever route you've done, you need to know the underpinning theories from E2, P2 and F2. So I'll just mention some of those key theories tonight. Now, what you need to do over the coming 6 weeks is to actually make sure you can understand and explain these key theories. So you will need to go back through E2, F2, P2 and make sure that you've got that knowledge, because in the exam, you are tested on these theories. You're tested on these theories in the context of a real company. And that company for us is Flathall. So we are blending our knowledge from the theory of E2, F2 and P2 with our understanding of this company Flathall from the pre-scene, and we're then going to be able to answer the questions in the exam that ask us to apply our knowledge to this company. So the key theories are going to be very important. Now, remember that I did say on our courses, we have the recaps of those theories, so that's helpful. You obviously have got to management case either through the FLP route or through the traditional routes, which means you have studied all these theories. So you might need to go back to your notes and your books and just recap those key theories. Then what we'll do towards the end of this evening session is we will have an action plan. So what do you now need to do? Finally, we'll have time at the end for questions. So I'll go through any questions that you've popped in that chat box. So as I said, any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box. Okay, then. So I think what that means is, first of all, let's have a look at the pre-scene. Now, you, I hope, have got yourself a copy of the pre-scene. Flathall is the company that we're looking at this time. And from now, you need to be really going through it and making yourself really familiar with it, thinking about what you're reading and thinking about how all of the knowledge you've got from E2, F2 and P2 could relate to Flathall in the scenarios that they might test you in the exam. So let's start with a bit of an overview of this company. And if you've already read the pre-scene, you might well know some of these things that I'm going to mention. Now, the pre-scene itself is about 10, 12 pages. So I'm only going to be summarizing here some of the key points. You must make sure that you read it all properly and you think about it all and you become familiar with it. Now, you might say, why, Louise, do I really need to understand the pre-scene? Because on the exam day, they're going to give me more information and they're going to give me the question. So why do I need to really know this information about the company that they've already given me? And there's some really important reasons why you should have a really good understanding of the pre-scene. So I'm just going to mention these right now. The first reason is because you've got to be confident that in the exam, you will be able to answer a question as if you worked at Flathall. Understanding the company as well as you would do if you worked for it. Now, you need to do that because you need to be confident. You need to know that a point you're writing in your exam is relevant to Flathall, is right, is appropriate. You don't want to write something in the exam that actually would not work for Flathall, perhaps even contradicts the pre-scene. So knowing the pre-scene really well helps you to feel like you work there, you understand it properly, and you've got all that understanding at your fingertips to be confident to use in the exam. The exam is about how you would advise the senior management team at Flathall in relation to the question they ask you in the exam. How you advise the senior management team. As a finance manager, what would your advice be? And it's not theoretical advice, it's advice to these managers at Flathall. So you've got to be confident and comfortable that you understand about Flathall. Now, the second reason to understand it is because you've got to apply E2, F2 and P2 knowledge appropriately. When you are asked questions in the exam, you've got to apply your theory to Flathall appropriately, giving sensible answers, common sense, sensible answers. But if you've not really understood this company, your answers might not be very sensible. They might not be full of appropriate common sense for Flathall. Next, the better you understand the pre-scene, the better you are able to anticipate what might come up in the exam. Because the more we understand what we know about Flathall and its industry it's in, and the finances it's got, then the more we can anticipate what type of things we could get as the scenario on exam day. On exam day, you will find that Flathall has moved on since the pre-scene information. Something will be happening. Perhaps they are deciding to move into another country. Or perhaps they've decided they need to completely change their appraisal system and performance measurement system. Your exam will have this dated change to what's going on at Flathall. And you need to make sure that when you're answering the questions, you can relate the theory to both the new information you've got and the pre-seen. And the final point is that in a good answer that you write, you need to be bringing into your answer information that is relevant to flat haul. That might be a little bit of information from the pre-seen. It might be some financial information from the pre-seen, or something that it's told us in the pre-seen about the competitors or the market. But you need to be bringing into your answer information from the pre-seen and the extra information about flat haul that you get on the day of the exam. So I'm hoping I've convinced you that it's absolutely vital that you really do understand the pre-seen. So a lot of time to be spent getting to grips with it, understanding it, feeling comfortable. So let's pull out the key points. So our company is called Flat Haul, and what it does is it builds accommodation for students. It builds purpose-built student accommodation, PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation. And we can see a picture here of the kind of accommodation that we're talking about, modern accommodation blocks. So they build purpose-built accommodation, and they've got, at the moment, in the pre-seen time, they've got 174 different buildings. And these buildings are all spread about the country that is Thailand. And Thailand uses the Thailand dollar as its currency. Now, important to note then that Flat Haul is currently not in any other overseas markets. But that's why this is important, because then we can go, well, what if in the exam there is a proposal that Flat Haul is going to build a new accommodation building in a neighbouring country? Or they're going to acquire another accommodation company in another country, because then we start to think about issues like F2 and consolidation. We might talk about negotiation skills if we are thinking of acquiring another company, so we're negotiating about a price. We might be thinking about communication if Flat Haul becomes bigger and is operating in different countries. So at the moment, it is just based in Thailand. Now, it was quoted on the Thailand Stock Exchange in 2002, so it's a listed company. Again, why does that matter? Well, one reason is because it has access to funding through raising more shares, as well as access to funding, of course, through debt. So that reminds us that we need to know the advantages and disadvantages about funding through equity and through debt. To us, in our exam, perhaps they're expanding overseas and they need some funding. And we get to ask the question about the advantages and disadvantages of different methods of raising those funds. Now, Flat Haul is the largest purpose-built student accommodation provider in Thailand. It's the biggest. It's been going for 30 years. It's got an excellent reputation. Being the largest, it's probably got big economies of scale. It was one of the first into the market, so it's managed to grow right from the start, making it the biggest. But that means it's the longest established, and that might mean that some of its buildings are now not quite as modern as some of the smaller competitors in Thailand. Perhaps Flat Haul's accommodation buildings need a bit more technology in them. And that perhaps means that in exam day, we get a scenario where there's going to have to be a big expense on refurbishing some of these buildings. And we could get asked about funding, or we could be asked about project management of that. The final point on this slide is that each of these buildings offers students accommodation and other associated services. So these buildings have shared space where perhaps there could be events for lots of students. These buildings have laundry facilities. And if you read around a little bit in the industry, We know that some of these buildings have swimming pools, they have gyms, they have games rooms, they have cinema rooms. So this is the kind of building we are talking about. And Flathall has 174 of them. Okay, then, so what about the operations? What goes on? So first of all, there's a nice little photo there of a kind of student room. And if any of you have been to a university anywhere in the world, you might recognise this type of accommodation. This is the kind of accommodation that a PBSA provider provides. Very modern, a bedroom with a study area, good Wi-Fi throughout. So this is what is going on in these buildings. So in terms of operations then, Flathall has buildings in cities right across Towland, but we don't know from the pre-scene whether there are some cities where Flathall does not have any buildings. And it might be that in your exam, they are going to build 2 more buildings in a new city. Now, all the cities across Towland aren't all going to be equally successful as student cities and student towns. Some of these cities and towns will have 3 or 4 colleges and universities. Some of these cities and towns might only have 1. Some of these universities and colleges might be much stronger in terms of drawing students to them because of their reputation. And that means there'll be more demand for accommodation. So not all towns and cities in Towland are going to be equally profitable for Flathall to be in, which then leads me to think about the possibility of performance measurement and whether each building is being measured in terms of the profits that it generates, or are Flathall management considering each building as a trust centre or an investment centre? And we don't know that from the pre-scene, but responsibility centres are certainly something from P2 that could easily be tested in the exam. Each building that Flathall builds is within 20 minutes of at least 1 college or university. And that's a key factor in how Flathall decides where to locate its buildings. Ease of access for students. Now, we might therefore come across in the exam a scenario where they're planning on building a building that's further away than that. Perhaps they therefore decide they're going to have to set up their own transport. So a different income stream. Now, Flathall likes to make sure that it is not only high quality accommodation, but it builds in safe and attractive areas. It wants to appeal to students and it wants to provide them with the very best possible services and the best possible scenario for them to be living in order to make studying and living just easy for them. Now, the way that Flathall deals with students is primarily through the concierges. So each building has a team of concierges, and these are the people on the front reception desk. And it's these people who are the first person that any student who has an issue or needs some advice or help goes to. So the concierges are very, very important to Flathall, very, very busy. And that leads us to start to think about possible issues to do with the concierges feeling overworked and there being conflict. So I'm going now into E2 and thinking about conflict management. If the concierge feel like they've got too much to do. Also thinking about management of them to make sure that they are being the face of Flathall that Flathall senior management want them to be. So performance appraisal, for example, is important. Now, in terms of these student rooms, these rooms are arranged into flats. And we know from the pre-scene that there are several flats on each floor of a building. So a building could be 8 or 9 floors high, and each floor might have 4 or 5 flats in it, and there'll be a number of rooms in each flat. So it's a very specific and clear layout that Most of Flathall's buildings seem to follow that same sort of layout, and actually makes it a lot easier when it comes to things like equipping those rooms and equipping the kitchens, and also cleaning and refurbishing them. They've got a standard model, a standard approach. But let's think about the other side of that. Is that what all students want? Might there be a demand for a different type of room in a different type of flat? At the moment, the Flathall flats have shared bathrooms, from what we know in the pre-scene, and they have shared kitchen space. It might be that some students would like an ensuite bathroom. It might be that some students would like a studio where they've got kitchen facilities within their room. At the moment, from the pre-scene, that doesn't appear to be something Flathall offers, but perhaps they could. Okay, then. So what are the actual activities Flathall do? So obviously they provide accommodation. They provide accommodation for 2 semesters. So from September to May, the 2 semesters of the universities where the students are studying, they provide rooms under rental agreements for that period of time. And then from May to August, they repair, maintain, and refurbish. They also market their rooms for the next year for the students arriving before September. They have tours of the buildings. So it's a very busy period in that time when students aren't normally at university. Now, Flathall also relies on a lot of IT. So the student rental contracts are managed online, payments are managed online, and the website is the main showcase for the accommodation that Flathall has. They have photos, they have video tours, they have lots of information. They enable students to book on tours that are happening in the May to August period. So the website and technology is incredibly important. And we could imagine that there could be even more importance in the exam. Suggestions for a newer, bigger website that can do more and offer more to students. Or what about an app for students? Or the use of virtual reality or artificial intelligence. So lots of scope for us being tested on new IT, digital disruption, project management. Now, very important for Flathall is the relationships that it develops with a variety of different people and businesses. So first of all, it has really good relationships with the university accommodation services. So every university has accommodation services, and they help students to find accommodation. And Flathall develops good relationships with these departments in all the different universities and colleges because it aims to be the purpose-built accommodation provider of choice of that university. And they want the university to recommend Flathall's accommodation if the university needs to recommend accommodation outside of their own halls of residence. So really important to maintain strong relationships with the accommodation services teams at all the universities in all of the towns where Flathall has accommodation buildings. Now, of course, Flathall does build buildings. And from the pre-scene, we know that most of the 174 buildings it has have been built from the ground up, purpose-built for student accommodation. They have a small number of buildings which were once used for some other purpose, like an office, and they've refurbished them to turn them into student accommodation. But mainly they build from the ground up, which means they have strong relationships with the building contractors, architects, lawyers, and also planning departments of the local city councils or authorities. Because, of course, to build where Flathall wants to build, they need to get planning permission. So it's going to be very important to have the right designs, the right building techniques, the right sustainability measures in place, the right relationships with planning departments in order to be able to build the accommodation they want in the places they want to build it. So strong relationships, really important. Finally, of course, there's finance. Now, what we know from the pre-scene is that Flathall takes a month's deposit when a student reserves a room. So let's say that's August, before the start of the term in September. So Flathall will take a month's deposit in advance in, say, the August time, and it then returns that deposit at the end of the rental. So that'll be about May, once Flathall has inspected the room and there's been no damage. Now, in terms of that, I would just say that's there's some implications there, aren't there, for cash flow. So they're very cash rich when they're taking all these deposits in the sort of August time, and then they have to repay it all come the following April, May time. They're also in that May, June, July time, they're not bringing in any rental income because the students are now on holiday, but it's the time when Flathall might be repairing and refurbishing the buildings or the rooms. So there's definitely cash flow management to think about, I think, because the cash flows here aren't steady throughout the year. The rental income that does come in from students comes in at the start of every month. That's an agreement the student makes, and that's good because that's guaranteed cash coming into Flathall on a regular basis. Of course, we have to wonder what happens if students leave the universities and they might leave their accommodation. Do they still have to pay for it? What happens then? Are there many bad debts? Okay, in terms of the structure of Flathall, what we know is that in the buildings themselves, then the concierges, the teams of those reception desk people who are the first people to deal with student queries, those people and the cleaning staff are based permanently in the buildings. Apart from that, all the other members of staff are based back in the head office. Just the concierges and cleaning staff are in the buildings. So in the head office, there are a number of central teams. There's the property portfolio management team. Now, these, of course, are going to be very, very focused on the plans for the new buildings, the sourcing locations for new buildings, negotiating the purchase of sites, maintaining those relationships with contractors, doing the negotiations to obtain various building services from contractors, refurbishing buildings. I said Flathall is perhaps the oldest PBSA provider in Towland, which is good. It's the biggest because it's managed to grow since the start. But that could mean that some of the rooms do need a bit of an upgrade now, or the kitchens do, or the bathrooms. So refurbishment of the buildings is also really important. The accommodation needs to look new every year when a new range of students come into those buildings. So there's a constant need for the property portfolio team to be looking not only to expand the portfolio of buildings, but also to make sure that they are refurbished appropriately. Now, the customer service team deal with any escalation of student queries from the concierges. They deal with any other sorts of marketing and arranging visits around buildings, etc. So customer services, heavily involved with the concierges and the cleaning staff. Operations team, making sure that things are fixed and repaired as and when they are needed. So they, of course, need to be very responsive to any issues that the concierges can't fix themselves, so that the operations department are made aware and can solve any problems. Really important that for a company that is maintaining its reputation through quality, that all of these departments are working really effectively. We've already mentioned IT and the importance of that. And we've also mentioned finance in terms of raising funds, in terms of managing the cash flows and perhaps treasury management, and also in terms of collecting the rent. Now, we know Flathall is a listed company and they have 5 non-exec directors, as we would expect. Okay, then. Now, in the pre-scene, if you've seen it, there is a whole page dedicated to the business model. And the business model is very important because it is tested in every sitting of this exam. Now, when you sit your exam, there will probably be 6 different variations of the exam. So you won't sit the same exam as someone else who might be sitting it at exactly the same time as you. But in one of those variants of the exam, or 2, there'll be a question on the business model. So understanding Flathall's business model and what they do, how they create value, how they make profits for shareholders, how they maintain their place in the market, really important. So a summary here. Flathall defines value as making purpose-built accommodation that is safe, that's high quality, that's attractive for the student market, not for any others, just students, allowing students to study and live in a relaxed and safe environment. Now, how do they then build on that and create value? Because they identify new sites with unmet demand. And so far that's been in Towland. Potentially, they may start to expand overseas. Not only do they identify good new sites, they are experts at the acquisition of those sites for the right price and at the building of that building and the accommodation that students actually really want. They deliver value by having these strong relationships with the accommodation services at colleges and universities. And they also build strong relationships with students, many of whom come back in the 2nd year and 3rd year because they like the quality of the accommodation, the service provided so much. And then finally, how do they capture from that activity the element of profit then? That is that wealth creation for shareholders. And how they do that is through the quality they offer and the reputation they have. They charge realistic rents. And throughout the pre-scene, we are told 2 or 3 times, this industry does not compete on price. The purpose-built student accommodation sector cannot provide enough accommodation for the demand that there is. It's high quality accommodation. It's always looking new. It's in buildings with lots of great services and students want to live in it. So there's more demand than there is capacity. It's high quality and therefore rents are not cheap, but students find them value for money and are prepared to pay them. So by being high quality, Flathall can set a high rent, I suppose we'd say, but that's fine because students are happy to pay for it because it represents quality to them. So by keeping up that reputation, that's how Flathall can generate those profits. Now, of course, in the exam, anything that might threaten that reputation would be a risk and a problem. Okay, then. So let's just think about a little bit more of various things we were told in the pre-scene. Excuse me. So first of all, we are told in the pre-scene about the other competitors in Towland. We're given a little graph about the turnover of about 9 other competitors. We know Flathall's the biggest. And we're also told in the financial information about Doveit. And Doveit is the next biggest competitor. Now, whenever we've got competitor information, that might be there for lots of different reasons. So we can think about the potential that one of these competitors goes and does something different in the marketplace, and Flathall has to decide how to respond. Or we could consider that Flathall might decide to take over one of these companies, acquire one of them. And then we would have to consider in the exam, consolidations and negotiations, etc. So that competitor information is useful just to think about for a little bit when you read that pre-scene. Now, although there is that competition, what I've already said is also true, which is that the demand exceeds supply. So there's enough demand from the pre-scene. We know there's enough demand at the moment for all of these providers to be working at virtually 100% capacity. Now, there are other competitors we could think of too, because students could also choose to live in universities' own accommodation, halls of residence, or private rentals. So they could get a private rental of a flat, a shared flat, or just a room in a house from private landlords. So two other sources of accommodation. Now, we know from the pre-scene that the university accommodation is very popular with first-year students, but it sells out very quickly. And that's when the good relationship with the university accommodation departments helps Flathall, because Flathall will then be recommended as the first preferred supplier for accommodation when the halls of residence are full. Now, private rentals tend to be where the students go if they can't get university accommodation or the purpose-built student accommodation. Private rentals tend to be of lower quality, of mixed quality, and of variable pricing. So it could be cheaper, but equally potentially could be expensive because it's less regulated, and that it's just different private landlords who are letting out accommodation they own. Now, both domestic students and international students can attend institutes, universities and colleges in Towland. So that means Flathall needs to accommodate both domestic and international students. Now, there are some regulations about how many domestic students the universities can take, but they can take as many international students as the university wants to. So there is a need to just bear in mind that the demand for accommodation that Flathall finds will depend on government policies in Towland towards the number of domestic students universities can have, towards international students. So, for example, if the government in Towland makes it easier and more attractive for international students to come to Towland, that will boost demand for accommodation. On the other hand, if Towland makes it harder for students to get visas to go into Towland for education, that will reduce demand. So at the moment in Towland, there is lots and lots of demand, there isn't enough supply, and all these PBSA companies are doing well. We don't know what might happen in the unseen. Okay. And if we just have a quick look at some of the finances, and there's a lot more detail in the pre-scene that you should have a look at, but just so we get a feel for it, revenues have increased this year from last year by almost 16%. So significant growth. It's a little bit less than Dovett, which is the next nearest competitor, but Dovett is a bit smaller, but it's a significant growth. And what we actually know when we look at the real life industry of student accommodation, purpose-built, is that it is a rapidly growing industry. A little bit of research into this purpose-built student accommodation industry finds that in most countries of the world, it is a rapidly growing sector, and therefore it's very attractive for investors to get into. Now, not only is revenue increasing, but operating profits have increased significantly, so 22.5% compared to last year. So they've managed to maintain good levels of profits, and their operating profit margins have grown from 72% to 76%, whilst Milto, not Milto, I've made a mistake there in my slide, while Dovets has remained, it's gone down slightly. So flat tool margins growing is good. We can see they've got good cost control, but again, what might happen in the exam day? Profits after tax also increased, so nearly 20% versus the previous year. And from those profits, they've paid out dividends of about a third paid out as dividends. So a third paid out as dividends to investors, 2/3 kept in the company, reinvested. And obviously we would then expect, wouldn't we, that probably investors are expecting a similar level of dividend payout in the following year. So just to sort of summarise with those key ratios, we've got a gross profit margin there. It's falling slightly, but not majorly. But operating profit margin increasing, so maintaining good controls over those costs. Net profit margin, again, slight improvement. Now the cash conversion cycle, so reflecting how long it takes to bring in cash from students versus then paying out cash, what we can see here is that it's a massive number of days, negative, massive number of days. That might look strange, but if we think about it, the payables that Flathall has, every single student, so that's 78,000, pay a deposit up front in August, which doesn't get repaid until the following year. Now that is going to have a massive impact on this cash conversion cycle. So normally we would not expect it to be anything like this. In another industry, we'd expect it to be a very low number, or 2 or 3, 4, 20, 10, something like that. This is because of the deposits being paid a year later situation. Now, another final key measure, of course, is gearing. Always important to know about gearing, because if there's any need to invest more money in Flathall because they want to build a new building or they want to expand their IT, well, we need to know whether the gearing level is already high or not, because that would influence whether we would say, well, debt isn't a good idea. And what we know is that the gearing is increasing, but appear to be a high level, and certainly seems to be similar to Dovett, which is the nearest competitor. So that, I would be expecting that if we were going to need more funding, based on what we know from the pre-scene, it would be certainly reasonable to suggest that they could take out debt. And they could also get some more equity investment. But debt certainly wouldn't be something that we would automatically say was a bad idea. It would seem to be possible. Okay, so what about then, from that pre-scene, the kind of scenarios that we need to be ready for? So expansion, we've already mentioned it, haven't we? Flathall may expand into a new country by building a new student accommodation, new buildings. And that could open up questions about currency and also consolidation. They could come up with a whole new revenue stream. So yes, at the moment, their revenue is all from accommodation for students. They could come up with a new revenue stream. Now, that could be new services that they will offer their students. For example, I mentioned, perhaps they'll decide to have some buildings that are further away from a university or college, but they're going to run their own transport, setting up their own bus service. That would be a new revenue stream. They might use that bus service, not just for their own Flathall students, but for other students as well. So there could be in the exam suggestion for a new revenue stream like that. Or, as I put on this slide, and this is something which some of the real industry PBSA companies are doing, they might decide to start building accommodation for young professionals. So not now near universities, but near towns and cities where there are big places of work, big offices. and building accommodation for those young professionals. So perhaps studios or one-bedroom flats. Now, they could acquire another company, and I've already said they could acquire a competitor in Thailand. They could acquire a competitor overseas. They could acquire a completely unrelated business. So if we just carried on thinking about transport, they could acquire a transport company. So we have to, when we read the pre-scene, be alert and thinking about what would happen in the future that Flathall might decide to do. Okay, then. Flathall, as I've said to you tonight, very much focused on quality, reputation. But what I've also said is we don't know how the management of Flathall manage the performance of each of their buildings. We don't know about their approach to responsibility centres. We don't know if they are cost centres, profit centres, investment centres. We know nothing at the moment. That is something that could well be tested in the exam. A proposal might be put forward as to how to treat the buildings, how to ensure that everyone in each of the buildings is working towards those goals of quality and maintaining reputation. So performance measurement, performance management, again, a good potential scenario in the exam. Okay, so this brings me to the end, really, of just chatting through the pre-scene. Now, obviously, for the courses that we have, there is, some separate recordings that I've done where I go through the pre-scene line by line, go through the finances, obviously in much more detail than tonight. Hopefully, that's inspired you to get that pre-scene and have another good read of it and really start to think about each paragraph, each sentence. What type of theories of E2, F2 and P2 might be relevant here? And what are potential scenarios that could come up in the exam? So let's move on to think about those key theories. So I'm not going to obviously be able to tonight recap all of these. What I want to do is just to highlight to you the theories that we need to be, some of the theories that we need to be aware of. I would also say that on these slides, it does not cover every theory that could be tested. We've just picked out, some of the bigger ones, but, anything in E2, P2 and F2 could be tested in your management case. Now, some important points. In the management case exam, you will not have to produce big calculations, big methods. You are not going to have to consolidate something. You are not going to have to produce a net present value calculation. But the numbers and the production of numbers and using those techniques, they've been tested as you've studied the underpinning E2, F2 and P2. So you're not going to have to do those in this exam, but what you are going to have to do is evaluate those techniques or explain those techniques or justify those techniques or explain the advantages and disadvantages of different techniques. So in the management case exam, you are going to be writing narrative answers, explaining about some of these techniques, using some of the knowledge that you've got to explain the impacts perhaps on the company, to explain whether the net present value would be better to use than the internal rate of return and why. To explain perhaps the difficulties of identifying cash flows that would go into a net present value investment appraisal technique. So you're not going to do the numbers, but you are going to have to be able to explain and therefore understand the techniques that you have learnt before. Okay, so what theories have we got? So first of all, P2. Now, P2 is the lead paper for management case. What does that mean? It means in your exam, you will be asked 8 different requirements. So you've got 3 hours and you'll be asked 8 requirements. Of those 8, it is likely that 3 of them, if not 4, will be from P2. So 3 or 4 of those requirements from P2. That's what it means by it's the lead paper. Okay then. So I've already mentioned we need to be all over different responsibility centre approaches like investment centres and profit centres. And we need to think about before the exam, which ones of those we think would or wouldn't be appropriate for flat haul and why. And then in the exam, we will be given more information and we might have to evaluate whether we think each building should be treated as a cost centre or a profit centre. So responsibility centres. Now, risk and uncertainty. Obviously, for any company that's got a strategy, there's always going to be risks. And you could be tested on the risks associated more on the operational level from Flat Hall's board's decision to pursue a new strategy. So if they've decided that they're going to build a building for young professionals, we might need to think about the risks associated with that. Regularly tested in the exam. You need to be ready to think about the different types of risks and also how you manage those risks. Now, we know Flat Hall is a quality provider. That is how they manage to charge relatively high rents, because they do offer high quality. How do they keep the quality up? We need to know about some quality management techniques like total quality management, for example. We need to think about how we should maintain that quality. What techniques do you know would help Flat Hall to do that? Pricing. We've said at the moment, really, Flat Hall and its competitors can price quite high. They don't compete on price because there's more than enough students demanding accommodation that they can all set quite a high price and all of their rooms will be full. But if Flat Hall decided to go into a new country and build accommodation there, it might be a whole different economic setup. So pricing might then be relevant. Pricing strategies to go in with a high price, to go in with a low price, thinking about market skimming, thinking about price differentials. At the moment, we don't know how Flat Hall sets its prices between different towns that it has accommodation in. We don't know if it sets different prices within a block for different rooms. So we need to make sure that we understand and could talk about different pricing methods applicable to Flat Hall. Now, transfer pricing is something that is regularly tested. Not so easy to see how it would be tested here in terms of what we know from the pre-seen, but given that on exam day, the unseen moves Flat Hall along and it will have done something new or be thinking of doing something new, it could do something quite radical, which would mean transfer pricing suddenly was a relevant thing to discuss. So how would we set a price for the sale of goods or services from one part of Flat Hall to another? That transfer pricing issue. How to make sure that we set a price that motivates everybody within Flat Hall, that doesn't cause conflict. So theory of transfer pricing, an important P2 topic. Now, we've seen that in terms of costs, the margins seem to be good and slightly improving. So cost management is obviously always going to be a very important aspect for any organisation. And that's another area of P2 that's really important. Target costing has been tested in the past as well. I think that's on my slide there at the bottom. So being aware of different cost management techniques and understanding what target costing is and thinking how it could apply to flat haul, really good ideas. Now, obviously, investment appraisal is pretty critical to any organisation, and any kind of investment that flat haul is thinking they might make, you could be asked about it from an investment appraisal perspective. So you might be asked about net present value versus IRR versus payback, and how useful each of those three would be in this situation. You could be asked about how you would determine the cash flows to go in a net present value calculation. So making sure that you're happy with what those methods are, how you do them, what the difficulties are with them is going to be very, very relevant. Let's move on to F2. Now, really important here that we understand that whilst F2 is not the lead paper, you are likely to get 2 requirements of the 8, possibly 3, which are from F2. Now, the examiner regularly says that the F2 requirements are the ones that are done badly. Students are not able to explain accounting techniques. So what you must do is you've got to go back to your F2 accounting standard knowledge and make sure that you can write down in words how to account for each of those areas that were covered in F2. For example, not sources of finance, I'll come back to that one. For example, consolidation accounting. How is a consolidation done? How is goodwill calculated? What is goodwill? You need to be able to explain that in words. You need to be able to also explain how you would account for an associate or a joint venture. These have all been tested in the past, and if flat haul decides to invest in another company but only invest 30%, acquiring 30% of its shares, that would be an associate. How is that accounted for? As opposed to if they got control, and that would be a subsidiary. So being able to explain in words, now that's very different from the skill you needed to pass the F2 objective test exam, or the skills you needed in FLP when you were tested on this area. So being able to write in words to explain to a reader. IFRS 15 and how to account for revenue. Again, important that you know when you should or should not record some cash that's come in as revenue. Flat haul, for example, takes deposits from students. And what we should know is that deposit should not be recorded as credit revenue. So you need to be able to explain the rules of IFRS 15. Provisions. Often in the management case exams, there'll be some kind of provision needed, perhaps, or a contingent liability. Can you explain what a provision is and what a contingent liability is? Sometimes there might be something like a legal claim against a company. So perhaps a student sues flat haul because they were injured when they were walking down the stairs in one of the buildings. And flat haul might need to make a provision or disclose a contingent liability. If you need to explain that in the exam, you've got to be able to do that in words. Similarly, interpretation of financial statements, you need to be able to discuss the impact of certain things on ratios. And that is normally something students are better at because that's not accounting standard knowledge. But you do need to be able to explain the impact of certain things that might come up in the exam on the financial statements and therefore on ratios. Integrated reporting is another relevant area of F2. This is a listed company, flat haul. And integrated reporting is about reporting on those 6 capitals. So, for example, human capital. And you must make sure that you're aware of what integrated reporting is and what types of things you think that flat haul would therefore report under those 6 capitals. Now, intangible assets, easily tested, particularly for developments. What if Flathall was developing a new app for students to use? And on this app, students would be able to access their rooms, access the front entrance area of the building. They'd be able to book the washing machine and the laundry. They'd be able to book additional services. What if Flathall was developing an app? You need to be able to explain whether development expenditure can be capitalised or not. You need to know the criteria for capitalising development expenditure. And you also need to understand about amortisation of intangibles and be able to explain that too. Now, finally, on this slide, there's the WACC, and at the top left, there's sources of finance. So in F2, of course, that's where we cover debt versus equity. You need to have some good advantages and disadvantages of both, but again, in relation to Flathall. And you need to be able to understand how the WACC is calculated, the weighted average cost of capital. You're not going to have to calculate it, but you're going to have to explain that potentially. And you're going to have to explain how the WACC might change if Flathall gets some new funding. You might have to explain what use the WACC is. What is the weighted average cost of capital used for by a company? So some really important areas of F2. And if anything, I would suggest that that's perhaps more of a technical area than P2. So really important you spend time going back through key theories in F2. Now, E2 is probably the second most heavily tested subject in MCS. Lots of different possibilities from E2. And again, what you need to know is the theories from E2, I often think of in terms of the key headings, the key lists, because what you're going to do with a lot of E2 here is you're going to very much then be applying it to Flathall, and a lot of that will be relating it to what you've read in the exam unseen about what's going on at the moment in Flathall, and also relating it back to what we know from the pre-C. So we need to be able to apply the theories from E2. So for example, I'll come back to the business model in a moment. Leadership, conflict. We need to be able to discuss when conflict is good, when conflict is bad. Different methods for managing conflict. We need to have a list of different leadership styles. We need to know what they mean. We need to then recognise them. We need to advise Flathall what would or wouldn't work in a certain situation. Negotiation, we need a good process. Can we learn a step-by-step process of negotiation? And then if we get a question on how could Flathall go about negotiating, we can build our answer around those steps. Digital disruption. Could Flathall introduce some new technology that would completely change how this industry operates? Now, perhaps an app wouldn't be that disruptive, but perhaps some form of artificial intelligence in the building, building management systems, some form of virtual reality, something like that could be proposed. We may need to discuss whether we think that is digital disruption. So we need to understand about that. Managing performance, so we need to think about target setting and goals and appraisals and setting objectives. Building teams, so what makes for an effective team and what would be a good balance of people in a team. These are all things that have been tested before and they're very practical really. So you really need to know the barest minimum, I would say, of each of these areas in terms of what are the key words, what's the key list, what's the key 5 points, and then you're going to apply that very much in the exam. Empowering people, so what's the role of management, what are the benefits of empowerment, delegation, again, motivation, all important theories, regularly tested, and in the exam you need to have a view for Flathall about whether it would be a good idea to empower this person or not, whether delegation is a good idea or not. And we need some good points about that. Project management, any kind of new thing that Flathall is going to do, of course, could be therefore structured as a project. And we could be asked about how to manage that project. We could be asked about the role of the project manager. We could be asked about different issues at different stages of the project. So again, understanding about project life cycle, roles of different people in the project, role of the project manager, all to be understood on this page, but then very much to be used in a much more applied way, using what we know about Flathall from the exam day and from the pre-scene. Remember, we are not writing a textbook in this exam. We are explaining to the management of Flathall how they should go about managing this certain project, or how they could go about forming a team to build this new app. So it's all got to be related to Flathall. The business model, I just missed out at first. Coming back to that now, regularly tested is a suggestion in the exam that perhaps Flathall does something new. And the question is, to what extent does that fit with the current business model? So you'd need to talk through those 4 different aspects of the business model that we've already looked at, the defining value and creating value, etc. And you need for each of those to then be able to discuss whether this new idea would fit with it or would not fit with it, and why. Okay, then, so some really good areas there of E2, F2 and E2 that really would be my starting point for you over the next few weeks to really get to grips with these, but not just in learning the theory, actually you putting aside time to think about these in relation to Flathall. I can't emphasize enough the importance of thinking, being familiar with the pre-scene, and then going back to your notes and getting to grips with the bits of theory that we've covered, but then thinking about them in relation to Flathall. Could you see negotiation being tested? How would you suggest if they decided to buy a building off a different competitor in Townland, how would they go about doing that negotiation? Thinking and giving yourself little scenarios is so valuable, because if you've done a lot of thinking before the exam, probably some of that thinking you will need in the exam, and it would be better to have thought it through before exam day. Okay, then. So next step is the action plan. All right, then. So what are you now going to do? So if you're on a course with us or with someone else, then obviously there's structure there. If you're not on a course, you need to structure the next few weeks, right? Have your own action plan. Right, so what should be in it? Well, if you are going to pass this exam, there's a few key things. First of all, you need to understand what the case exam is about. Now, I've already mentioned there's 8 requirements. I've given you a feel for the balance of P2, E2 and F2. So there's lots more to understand about how you will be tested. So understanding the exam, you can look at past exam papers. That will give you a good understanding of how things are tested. You can look at the website. Obviously, if you're on our course, we've got a session tomorrow evening, which is all about the exam and how the markers mark it, etc. So you need to get a good understanding of that exam, what it's about, how it's marked, so that you know what you're trying to deliver on exam day. Second, really good knowledge of those management level subjects that we've just looked at. Go back through your notes, look at all those key areas we've covered today, but also other areas as well. Make sure that if you got a question on those, you would be able to write and explain what they are. You'd be able to use that knowledge in Flathall. Okay, you need to develop your exam technique. Again, you can get that by looking back at past exams and what the examiner's report has said, because that will also help you with exam technique. You can get that from articles from the CIMA website. And also you can get that from the many applications that there are by the tuition providers. You need good knowledge of the pre-scene, and I'm hoping that I've inspired you to now go off and have a really good read of it and think about it. You need good time management on the day. 8 separate requirements in 3 hours. And those 8 are broken into 4 different sections of the exam. So you're going to have 45 minutes per section. And once that 45 minutes is finished, you can't come back to that section. So you'll have 2 requirements to do in 45 minutes, and then the exam will move on to the next section. Another 2 requirements for 45 minutes. Writing an answer to a requirement within the time is a big challenge. And it comes from 2 things. One is practice. You have got to practice writing mock exams with time. And it also comes from the amount of thinking you've been able to do before the exam about all these areas of theory that you need to know and how they relate to flat haul. Because if you've done a lot of thinking about that, you will already have a lot in your mind. So when you get an exam question, there will already be things in your mind you want to say. You will have already thought about this question because you did think about it when you looked at the theories. So the more you've prepared, the better you will be able to cope with the time on exam day. And the more you practice, the better you'll be able to cope with the time. Final point is you need commitment. The more time you spend on thinking, revising and practicing absolutely will help you earn more marks. The more commitment you can put into this now, the better the outcome. So you must plan your time now carefully to make sure that you make the most of what time you have got. I would have a weekly planner. I would write down what I'm going to do every week, and I would make sure that I stick to it. Okay, then. So that action plan that you need to have, it's going to depend upon your own circumstances. Some of you might have more time than others. But number 1 is make sure that exam is booked. There is no better thing to focus your mind on the need to do some work is having booked the exam. So book the exam and then get familiar with that exam. What is it going to look like? What does it look like in the past? Next, get to grips with that pre-scene properly so that you could explain to your friend all about flat haul without reading the pre-scene. Could you explain to your friend about flat haul in 15 minutes to really pull out all those key points? That's what we need to aim for. Each week, from this plan that you've got, try to revise those key areas from P2, F2 and E2. And what it doesn't say on here, but I would definitely want to add, is think about how those areas could be tested in relation to flat haul. So don't just learn what's in P2 again. For every area you look at, go, right, I've just looked at target costing. What could that mean for flat haul? Might they think that target costing would be a good idea or not? You must relate it in your head to flat haul and think about it. Right, week by week, you must do some mock papers. And wherever you get those from, you should also, when you've done a mock, you should then look at the solutions and critique your own answer. Look at where your answer could be better. Now, if you're going to be on a course where you have mocks and they are marked, well, that's fantastic. But if you're not doing that, you must look at your answers, compare them to the standard answer that's given in the book, and you need to decide where your answer needs improving. Because it's no good just attempting mock exams if you don't get better with each exam you do. And that's the key. So doing the mock is good, but learning how to do better with the next one is better. And that's what you must also set aside time for. Don't think you can cut corners by looking at a mock exam and then not actually trying to answer it. Oh, yes, I think I could do that. In reality, could you do that? Could you explain in words the difference between a subsidiary and an associate, for example? Could you explain in words the stages of a negotiation process? So make sure that you don't pretend that you could do a mock. Make sure you're actually doing them. Okay. Identifying those weaknesses, brushing up on those areas from those mocks we practice, absolutely vital. And as you're going through doing the mocks and week by week, we're getting closer to the exam, constantly looking back at theory and the pre-seen, looking again at how would I answer a question if this came up, constantly doing that all the way through as we get towards the exam. Okay, now I think you realise I'm going to say this, but practice makes perfect. That's what I keep saying. And the key to passing any case study exam is the need to practice. Don't be afraid to write an answer that actually isn't very good, because everybody has to start somewhere. And if we write an answer that's not very good, in a way, that's fantastic, because you will realise immediately where it's not very good. You will understand where your weaknesses are, and you'll be able to sort those out. So being bad at the first mock you do is almost brilliant, because then you'll go, yes, I can see that's wrong. I know I need to do this. Right, the next one, I'm going to do all these 3 things a lot better. So doing the mocks, you looking at the answers and looking at your own answers, or if you're having the marks, looking at the feedback from the marker, absolutely critical. And that final point there is just to remind you then that the important part of making mistakes and practicing mocks is to learn from them. So don't let these mocks frighten you. Absolutely not. Just go for it and start to learn. And, if you can do 5 mocks, so we have 5 mocks. If you can do 5 mocks, think how much you will improve over the course of those 5 mocks. And it is fantastic how people can improve. Okay, then. So I'm getting towards the end then of our session. So final closing little points, then I'll have a quick look back to any questions. So if you have got any more questions that you want to ask, just drop them in the chat box. So final things then that I'd say, first of all, CS is very passable, but it's very passable if you're well prepared. And being well prepared means knowing exactly what this exam is going to be like, understanding the way past exam sittings have tested the theories of E2, P2 and F2. So understand how you're going to be tested, knowing the underpinning theory and then practicing exams. That is what you need to do. If you do that, MCS is very passable. If you think about it, a case study is trying to represent real life. This is as close as an exam could get to actually testing you in real life. And in real life, in business, there are many good answers to a business question. In the MCS exam, there will be many good answers to the question, how should Flathall manage the project? There will be many good answers. So there is never one answer. So what's very good about MCS is if you're well prepared, confident, well prepared, know the pre-seen well, understand the theory, I've done lots of practicing, then when you're given a question in the exam, you will come up with a good answer because it will be based on theory. It will use all your knowledge of Flathall. It will have a good amount of common sense in it. It will be a good answer, and there will be many good answers. So MCS is definitely possible, but we need to prepare. If you're ready after today's session to plan out that study plan, do it. If you're ready to book the exam, get it booked. Make sure that the first thing you do is you spend an hour planning out the plan. And then you've got something to stick to. You'll see you're making progress. And that will be a super way of approaching it. If you're on our courses, we have a sort of 6-week plan. And obviously I will do my sessions each of the weeks. So that will help you to structure your time as well. But have a plan. Right. Start by revising management syllabus, P2E to F2, and reviewing the pre-seen. It's absolutely vital. Make sure that you've got some question practicing ready, that you've got some mocks to do. That must be part of your study plan. Make sure then that you review your performance. As I said, it's not about doing the mocks, it's about learning from them and improving. And then finally, if you've done everything you can, all I'd say is on the day, be confident. Manage your time well, be confident, apply your knowledge to flat haul, make sure what you're saying makes sense in terms of flat haul and who they are and what they do. And then hopefully you will do a good answer and you'll pass the exam. So lots to do, that's for sure, but there's time to do it. And if you get yourself a good plan, you will be able to pass this exam. Okay, then. So I'll go through any questions now. What's on screen, finally, we've got a little email address here. If you've got any questions to do with our courses that I showed you earlier, or you want to know any more about them before deciding whether you want to join our standard course or elite course, then info@vivatuition.com. That's where to email, and we'll happily be able to help you. And now let me have a look for any questions. Okay, then. So, okay, so Martin's asked about, you sat it in May and you were quite well prepared, but you didn't pass it. And is it possible that you could pass it this time? So what I would say to that is, the fact that you've already done an exam on flat haul, that's a bonus. And if you didn't get enough to pass last time, I would say the main focus now has to be on mock exams and feedback, because what will have let you down, I would have thought, it won't have been your knowledge, it's probably your exam technique. So anyone who has previously sat it and not passed it, my answer is always, absolutely, you'll pass it this time because you've got the underpinning theory. But what you've got to do is sort out any exam technique issues, because that's where you will be losing marks. Okay. So mock exam practice, really, really important to give you those extra marks. Leonie, difference in case study material between the FLP All Access course and the standard MCS course material. So FLP student looking at, okay, then. So so when you're talking about the FLP All Access course, you're talking about, tell me if I'm wrong, Leonie, you're talking about the Viva All Access course, which gives you access to all of the objective testing questions and also access to the case study areas. I'm presuming that's what you're asking. Yeah, the Viva one, absolutely, yeah. So what I'd say is, if you have the all access one, then you've got access to all of your strategic OT materials, haven't you? Whereas if you book on the standard MCS course, you'll get the MCS course, obviously, but then you don't have the access to the others. So really, I mean, it's just up to you. You could either just do the MCS one now, or you could go for the all access, and that will give you access to your strategic ones as well. Or which you might want to do, or you could go through to do the MCS now and then separately get the Viva strategic level. So really, would be up to you. That might be, obviously I'm the tutor, but I'm not really into all the detail of those of the details of those, how those courses are structured. So you might be better emailing Leonie that info via tuition.com and just asking them exactly what you get with the FLP All Access and what you get with the standard MCS. Okay, I wouldn't want to get this wrong and give you the wrong advice. Simbo, haven't gone through F2 and P2 fully. Not sure how to manage your time to cover all between now and August. So what I would say is you need to get some good revision notes, because I wouldn't go through all the detail again. I would get recap notes, revision notes. You want the mind maps. You want the lists of points. You don't want to be going back through all of the detailed book. So get yourself some revision notes, recap notes. Those are what you want to go through. And because what you don't want to do is spend all your time going through the theory and not getting on to the practicing of actual mock exams and not have enough time to really think about how this is tested and look at past exams. So revision and recap notes, that's what you need. Simbo, brilliant. You're on the elite course. So you should make use of Viva's recaps for E2, P2 and F2. And then really just start right now with looking at the mock. So what we're going to be doing on the elite course is tomorrow I'm going to be doing about the exam. And then after that, next weekend, I'm going to be doing mock 1. So each week you must do a mock if you're on the elite course. Get it marked. Definitely do it before I do my debrief session. Do it, submit it before I do my debrief session. If you've got it marked and back before I do my debrief session, that's great. But if you haven't, as long as you've done the mock and submitted it, then when I do my debrief, it will mean a lot to you. When we do the debrief of the mock, we will be going through theory as well. So that will also help you, Simbo, to revise the theory. So recap notes, use our recaps that we've got on the course. Use your own recap notes from when you did the E2, P2 and F2. And then we'll be recapping anyway when we go through the mocks. So that's what I would say about that. Okay, then. So it's anyone got any other questions? I can't see any others, but I'm happy to take any more if there are any. So if there aren't any more questions, then thank you for your time tonight. If you're not on one of our courses, this recording will be uploaded to YouTube. And, oh, hang about. Are there any more questions? Oh, hang about. Wait a minute. Oh, yes, in the Q&As. Thank you for that, everybody. I hadn't found that. Right then. So the recording of this seminar will be on YouTube for anyone who's not on the course, or even if you are. And also, if you're on the course, it will be uploaded to the course area. I believe that the slides will be shared. So they will be shared on the YouTube and on our YouTube channel. And also they will be shared on our course area. PayPal payment option, I'm not sure about that one. But that is a good question. Anything about payment, email info at, I'll put it back on screen. There we go. Info at vivatuition.com. And they will tell you about if there's a PayPal option. Okay, James, your question is exactly the same as Leonie's. So is the standard MCS course the same? And I think it is. So it's all the pre-recorded stuff. But I would just check that. On our website is probably enough. You can probably check that on the website or by emailing info at Viva Tuition. So the pass guarantee means if you're on our elite course, if you sit the exam and fail it, then you would be entitled to the course for the next sitting without having to repay again. So that's what the pass guarantee means. It doesn't come with the standard course, but it does come with the elite course. So it's just a nice bit of security. If you've committed to paying for our elite course, then we would support you through having the course again for the next sitting. And obviously the next sitting would be a new pre-scene, so that would be very useful, wouldn't it? Okay, if you're starting studying now, should you wait until November? I would say I would say that to get to grips with the flat hole pre-scene, to understand the exam, to practice exams, you've got enough time. If you've forgotten P2, E2 and F2 because it might have been a while since you sat those or studied them, that would be the only reason for delaying it to November. So if you think you're going to have to spend a bit longer getting to grips with the theory, then that might be a reason to delay. The only other reason for waiting till November would be then, if you do think that you might be pushed for time this time, obviously, if you delayed it till November, you'd then have the same pre-scene for 2 sittings. So if you do think that that's going to be an issue, then potentially it would be worth waiting. But what I would say is, if right now you've not read the pre-scene, you've not understood what the exam is yet, and you obviously haven't practiced any exams, there's enough time to do all of those things. It's just whether you've got enough theory, and only you know that, really. If you're sitting in November, can you start studying now? Absolutely, you could start studying now in many ways. So you could revise E2, P2, F2. You could go back through previous exam sittings to see what the exam looks like, how's it tested. You could understand everything about the exam. All of the practice mocks that we do, all of the analysis of the pre-scene and of the industry, that would be no use to you if you're going to wait till November. So if you're going to wait till November, really what you could do now is stuff that you don't need to be on a course for, because what you need to do is you need to be on the course for the exact pre-scene that you're going to be sitting. The November MCS course will start. Okay, so I can tell you that. Let me just find the dates and I'll tell you that. So the November course starts. Is that me doing November? That is me doing November. Yeah. 28th of September. So I start doing the pre-scene analysis on the 28th of September. That's when it starts. Okay, so another question regarding marking of each variant. Assume all variants will have different complexity levels. Yep. Yes, okay then. So the question is each variant scaled differently? And that's exactly right. So this is why when people say to me, what's the pass mark? I can't be exact. Because each variant of the exam is given a number out of 150, and each of the variants, as you're absolutely right, each of the variants has a slight difference in complexity, not major. So yes, there is a scaling. So it doesn't matter if you get a variant that you find a bit harder than someone else who sits the exam, because probably if you find it harder, so will most of the students who sat your variant, and therefore the marking will be appropriately scaled. So yeah, no need to worry about which variant am I going to get. Might it be harder? It all is scaled in the marking. Okay, re-sitters. So, yeah, okay, the mocks are the same as the ones that we did in May. So yeah, they are the same mocks. But what I would say is, if you're resitting it, it might well be worth just going back through those mocks again, and going back through debriefs again, because obviously if you're resitting it, there's still room for improvement with that exam technique. I would say that if you're resitting it, as I said before, it is going to be boiling down to exam technique. I doubt it's going to be boiling down to your knowledge. Only you will know if your knowledge really wasn't there. But if you think your knowledge was there, it will be exam technique. So although the mocks are the same mock, going back through them, trying them again, looking at the debriefs again. And if you're an elite student before and therefore you could attend these debriefs with me again, I think that would be well worthwhile. If I have all access. If I want to get mocks corrected, do I sit one of the 5 ones on the all access? So, okay, so this is where the all access I'm not sure about. So if you're on the elite course, you get your mocks marked. What I'm not sure about, and this is why I'm saying it might be best to email info@vivatuition.com. I'm not sure if you're on the all access, whether you get your mocks marked or not. So that might be something to actually ask through an email to info@vivatuition.com, so that you know, because I don't want to give you the wrong information there. Okay, so you need to pay extra to be marked. All right then. So thank you for that, Maya. So you've said that if you're on the all access, yes, you need to pay extra to be marked, but it is the 5 mocks that are available to you that you can then submit and have marked. Okay, when would we expect the pre-C material for November exam to be released? Oh, crikey. So it's normally, I'm going for, it's probably released at the first week of September. That's what I'm thinking, released to students. If you go on the CIMA website to find out, it will tell you the exam week dates and it will tell you when the pre-scene is released. But I'm thinking it's about the first week in September. Okay. So the recommended areas of P2, E2 and F2 that I chatted about, would these be the best areas to start on any future exam window? Yeah, absolutely. So those areas of P2, E2 and F2 that we went through, absolutely. Those are just things that are tested regularly. But the other tip for you all is to look at what other areas are tested in addition to the ones on my slides, because other areas are tested too. Go back to look at past exam sittings. You don't have to read the pre-scenes for all those past exam sittings. All you need to do is look at the actual exams, and they're all on CIMA's website. And if you look at the exams, you will see what the requirements are that come up in each variant, in each sitting. So you can see easily all of the different things that have been tested over the last, 6, 7 sittings. Really gives you a good idea about the other areas. So I start with the ones on the slides from today, and then look at the other areas that have been tested by looking at previous exams, and then focus on those. Okay, then. I think that's the end of all the Q's and A's and all the questions that were in the chat. So that's good. So hopefully I've solved your questions. Hopefully you're all now motivated to crack on. Those of you who are thinking about November, you know whether you're going to decide to do it now or do it in November. But the most important thing is if you're going to do it then for August, get that plan together. You know what you need to do. Get on with it. And hopefully I will see some of you tomorrow evening when I am doing the exam process session. So any elite students, I'll be doing that tomorrow, and I will see you again. Any standard students, you're going to be listening to me on all the recorded webinars that you've got. And everybody else, I wish you lots of good luck and good hard work in preparation for this exam. Okay then, folks, thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.